Probably, I mean, at the end, depending on how Kay wants to run it, you can kind of interrupt me if you wish, and I can sort of home in on that point. And then at the end of it, we can also do some sort of Q&A and stuff. So, I mean, a bit about me beyond sort of the profile. My degree is actually in biomedical science. So I don't necessarily have I don't have a finance background. So I kind of just literally went into banking and sort of went from the ground up. And that probably is the first thing I want to talk about in terms of, aspiring management and existing managers sort of going through their career and looking forward to the next best thing. The first point will be start where you are and effectively embrace it. Because I think personally that career is a journey, and the biggest part of it is the experience rather than the destination. So it's important that you start where you are and go through it, because as you go through it, you're going to get the tools of the trade, whether in relationships, whether in skills, whether in know-how. All those things come in handy. As I talk through, I'll probably try and share some of my own personal experiences that kind of really bring this to life. And I think it's very important with starting where you are that, particularly for those aspiring, try not to look at money. A lot of the times, you look at everything and you think, you know what, I'm going for the highest paid, or what offers the most. One of my fathers and mentors once said to me, the best thing any employer can give you is experience. And that is so true. So in starting from where you are, what you have is the benefit of gathering a multitude of experiences. And the other thing to think about, when I say don't let money be your motivation, is because very often in any cost-cutting exercise across any organization, the first thing that they look at in terms of the efficiency of the cost cut is how much they can, or how deep they can go with the cuts whilst keeping the impact minimal. So very often they'll start from the highest paid individuals and explore how many of those people they can cull to bring down costs massively without getting rid of too many bodies. So sometimes, being probably down the pecking order while you're gathering experience that will make you indispensable in the future is not always a bad thing. It's a good thing. By the time you get to the top, what you want to be is that person that the organization cannot and will not even dare do without. So starting from where you are is very essential to that. And a very personal experience around starting from where you are. Like I said, I started out in banking in the branch. So I started at, when I finished uni and I decided that I do want to do sciences as sort of my career path, I applied for all the graduate schemes that were under the sun, and I didn't get through any. And when I had decided that I wanted to go into banking, I basically decided to apply for a role in the branch. And in the branch, I had such a massive learning experience. Bear in mind, I don't have any background in finance. I learned not just about, finance management and all that kind of stuff. I also learned how to use banking applications and softwares and stuff that we used within the bank. And I remember that about 7 years on, I was working in a different team by then, already sort of progressing. And there was a very influential individual in the country who had a bank account, or in fact, who had many bank accounts. And he had an issue with identifying the bank account. So he wanted to be able to name the bank accounts in a way that he was able to identify which of his businesses that bank account related to. So every time he logged into his online banking, he'll be able to see it. But this guy, when he opened his account, I think for about 7 months, 6 to 7 months, they were going round the houses on how to solve this problem, and nobody knew. They went to the IT team, the business manager that opened the business account didn't know, tons of people. And I was working for the head of business bank at the time as his business manager. So it went up to the CEO passed it to the head of business bank, the head of business bank passed it to me and said, can you sort this out? And I looked at it and I thought, this is quite simple. This is something I'd learned in the branch 7 years before. And I reached out to I reached out to the guy who opened the bank account, gave him screenshots on what to do and said, look, this is what you need to do to solve this problem. It's literally a 30-second fix and it would make you look like a superstar because this has gone as far as up to the CEO. And the guy came back saying, if this thing has lasted for 7 months and no one has fixed it, and you're telling me it's a 30-second fix, I doubt that it's that simple. I mean, if 7 months, nobody in the bank has known how to do that, it's probably unlikely. And I thought, okay, I'll pick it up. So I reached out to this individual. It's a very famous name in the UK, so I want to kind of keep that disclosed. So I reached out to him and I said, look, I think I can solve this problem for you. And I think it's quite easy. I think it's a 30-second fix. And he said to me, if it's that simple, I will be going back to your leaders to, tell them how amazing you've been. And I said, well, just make sure you do that. So I wrote out and put the screenshots on what to do. And long and short is he didn't do it until midnight later that day. And the next thing, I think it was about 12:30 or just before 12, I saw an email from this guy to all the top bosses of the bank, saying to them how amazing I had been and how something that had lasted for 7 months, got fixed by. He assumed I was actually in the tech team, which I wasn't. But in his email was quite funny because he actually recommended to them that, oh, this guy needs to be promoted. Now, what am I trying to say? I would never have learned that if I did not work in the branch. That know-how of that particular tool, I learned it while I was in the branch. So it's very, very important that you start where you are. It might not be what you see as befitting of you, but there definitely is something that God is trying to teach you there. So it's important you do that. So that's the first thing I'd say. Start where you are, enjoy the journey, go with the experiences and fill up your toolkit as you're going through it. The second thing I'll sort of touch on is keeping the goal in focus. And when I say the goal, it's not your goal. Keep the business goal in focus. And what I mean by that is your role is often a subset of the business goal. So for example, if just to keep it simple, if I say, I've got 3 or 4 different teams to clean a house, right? And I say one set of people sweep the floor, and somebody else dust the walls and get rid of cobwebs, and somebody else tidy and stuff like that. The goal is clean the house. Your subset might be sweep the floor. But when you keep the goal of clean the house in mind, every time you're doing what you're doing, you're thinking of innovative ways of doing it, ways by which you will cut waste of effort and ways by which you will improve or add value to what you're doing. So sweeping the floor is a way of cleaning the floor. But then if you know that the goal is to clean the house, then you can start thinking, okay, beyond sweeping the floor, no one is cleaning the skirting boards. No one is mopping the floor. No one is maybe tidying the house. You start to think, because you're looking at the overall goal, you start to spot opportunities where you can actually make improvements, where you can do things better. And the reason this is important, I say to a lot of people, is that no organization is an entity in itself, right? Every organization is just a sum total of the people within that organization. And as a result of that, that organization is as weak as its weakest link. What do I mean by that? If you get a letter, for example, from Barclays Bank today, that letter was written by somebody like you and me. There is no Barclays Bank anywhere. Barclays Bank is a sum total of people. Now, if that person is not great at speaking English, you will spot errors in the letter. So it does not matter that the letter is coming from Barclays Bank. It's down to the person that is doing it. So you will often find that when you keep the goal in focus, what you're able to do is you're able to identify ways by which you can innovate, ways by which you can improve, ways by which you can cut waste. And then doing those kind of things effectively is what starts to get you noticed. Because when you start doing things better, when you start coming up with ideas, when you're the person who's doing it the most efficiently with the least errors, then you start to get noticed. The third thing I'm going to sort of touch on is being proactive and being visible. It's not enough to know the gaps. It's not enough to say, well, this is what's not being done well, and I know, and I know, and I know. Your knowledge is useless if it's not being put into action, right? Every organization gets people on so that they add value. So you need to be proactive with that innovation, with that idea, and be visible. With every email you send, with every contact you have, you need to be thinking about, okay, how am I solving the next person's problem? If I'm sending an email to the next team, I should be thinking in their shoes and thinking, okay, what's the problem this is meant to solve? With every engagement I have with them, how am I using the information I have around the gaps, around the team's goals? How am I using it to better the organization? And then you need to be visible. You need to be visible. And when I say visible, sometimes it's not about anything complex. When I was in the early days of my career, I kept in mind something I read in a book, first in, last out. And a lot of the time, I would make sure I was doing either or. I was either the first in the office or I was the last to leave the office. Now, I'm not saying everybody should do it, but one of the things it did is it helped me be visible to some of the leaders that needed to know me. Because before the office came crowded, I was probably in the office, sat, and stuff like that. And then it gave a bit of airtime. Sometimes working late, again, work-life balance is absolutely very important. So, I'm not saying sacrifice that, but you need to try and be visible. Make sure that in your contact, you're showing people there is value, but also do certain things that are strategic. I mean, for example, personally, whilst banking as a profession, a lot of people have moved away from wearing suits to work and stuff, but just for me as a personal preference, I still wear suits to work when I'm going into the office. And I didn't realize until a few years ago, I was sat with an MD and he commented on the fact that I like the fact that you still wear suits and you always look very sharp. So that deliberate action to dress a certain way made me visible. So sometimes it's not just the work you're doing that will make you visible. Sometimes it's the way you carry yourself. So you need to be proactive with your information, but you need to be deliberate about certain actions that will help you be visible. So I've mentioned dressing, I've mentioned first in, last out. I've mentioned in every sort of contact you have with different teams, ask yourself, what's the problem they're trying to solve? And in your contact with them, make sure you're taking them a step closer to that solution. All those things will make you or help you be visible. Another point I'll touch on is know your landscape and know your stakeholders. And this is very important because progression is not only vertical, right? Progression can be diagonal is the best way I'll put it. So the fact that you're in a particular team, progression is not just the next step up in that team. It could be the next step up in a team sideways. It could be potentially maybe a sideways move with a view to go up. So progression basically can be at an angle to where you currently are. And that's why knowing your landscape and knowing the different stakeholders effectively it is very, very important. When you know your landscape, you know your options, you know what the different teams are doing, you start to get a feel for, okay, this is something, that I think I might want to do. I might be a bit more interested in. And I think it also helps because, there's sometimes in that facade that you want to know, who's the top boss, who's the CEO, who's the director. Sometimes those are not the people you need for the next step. sometimes the person you need for the next step is just the manager of the next team, right? Because that's where your next step progression is going to come from. So you need to be aware of your landscape. You need to have that full awareness, what the different teams are, what it is they're doing, who's at the same level as you, potentially, how did they get there? What have they done? That awareness of your surrounding will help you, in a sense, to understand what your options potentially are. And then following that, you need to develop what I call an elevator pitch, right? Because you see, particularly, there's a lot of working from home now, but pre-COVID, presence in the office facilitates a lot of ad hoc, meet in the lift, meet by the kitchen while trying to make a coffee, join the same queue, while trying to buy a coffee. And then you get questions like, how are you doing? What are you doing now? And then you hear people come up with responses like, oh yeah, I'm fine. Or, oh yeah, work's just so busy. No. That's never to be your answer. You should have a watertight elevator pitch that effectively helps you summarize what it is you're doing and the value that you're bringing to the organization at that point in time. That is what starts to get you noticed. And if you're really good at thinking on your feet, you should try and connect it to the stakeholder you're speaking to. So for example, if I'm speaking to somebody in compliance and they're asking me what I do, I'll talk about what I do, but how it links to compliance. If I'm speaking to somebody in risk, I'll talk about what I do and how it interconnects with risk, because what that does is it helps me get noticed. It keeps me in their mind that, okay, this is what this guy is doing. And then because you made that connection to what they're doing, by the time they get to their desk, by the time they're dealing with their teams, they're thinking, oh, connect with that guy, he or connect with that lady, because, this is what she's working on. And very often, that breeds a lot of cross-pollination and builds your profile as somebody who knows what they're doing within the organization, particularly when you can make that connection in terms of what you're doing to the broader goal of the business, or how it actually impacts the actual sector that stakeholder you're speaking to is in. So it's very important that you have an elevator pitch, or a brief summary of what it is that you're working on, and sort of per time, and how it links to all these different roles. Then the fifth thing I'll say is quite useful. And just going back to the fourth, I think it's very important. Because, you just never really know where recommendations will come from. Like I said, I've worked in different parts of the bank, or like was read in my profile. I started out in retail bank, and then basically I went into business bank, and from business bank I was in corporate bank for a while. And one of the things that helped me with that, I remember, was a time when I was living in Southampton at the time, and one of the senior directors came in from London, and she was meeting with my director, my local director, and stuff. And I basically said to the director, can I have 5 minutes with this leader? And at the end of his meeting with her, he told her, okay, I've got this guy. At the time I was a support manager. He'd like to have 5 minutes with you. And literally 5 minutes, I was in there, rolled out my elevator pitch, what I was doing, and where I saw my future, and how I saw potentially if she could actually help with that. And that was basically the sort of seed that culminated in my journey moving out of Southampton into sort of the head office of Barclays, and sort of different roles that have happened since then. So you don't know which of the opportunities are there. So you need to have your own elevator pitch planned and ready, so that when the opportunities come, you're basically able to grab them with both hands. The fifth point I want to touch on is requesting feedback and acting on it rather. See, often this is the part that nobody wants to do, because it feels like, oh, you're telling me what I'm not doing well, and stuff like that. I don't want to hear anything about what I'm not doing well. But you see, requesting feedback and acting on it is actually a pivotal thing. it's quite pivotal because, one, when you request feedback from somebody, it means you're forcing the person to think about you. So the person has to think about you, think about the work you've done, and give you some commentary around it. So you're etching yourself in that person's memory. Inevitably, they will remember you. They cannot forget you. The second thing is, if you implement that feedback, it shows that you're mature. It shows that you're not emotional about work, you're passionate about delivery. So when they give you positive feedback, fantastic. But when they give you improvement or negative, or what you consider negative feedback, and you take it and act on it, and they see that you've acted on what they've said, you become somebody who's memorable, and you become somebody who's likable, because you didn't just take the feedback and walk away from it because you were unhappy that it was negative, but you did something about it. Again, you've not just etched yourself in their memory, you've now become somebody that they like and that they respect. And the third thing that I think feedback really is good for is it helps you know what you need to unlearn and what you need to relearn. If you're going to change the state or the shape of ice, you kind of need to melt it to water first and then put it in somewhere else. You know, one of the most difficult bits of feedback I had in my own career was when a leader said to me, "You're too subservient." And I was like, whoa, it was like a slap in the face. But when I went back and I looked at it, I realized it was true. And why was it true? I am a Nigerian-born, Nigerian-raised guy who has learned in culture that when elders are talking, you shut up, you know, and you don't speak except you're spoken to. And then I find myself in senior stakeholder meetings where directors and managing directors are talking. I sit there and I'm quiet because that's what's inside of me. That's what's been ingrained in me. And I realized that it was holding me back, because when some of my leaders saw my potential and, you know, brought me into the room where I could make impact, what they were seeing was that I wasn't contributing because I was quiet. So I had to take that feedback and learn from it and decide that, okay, no, I'm being brought into that room because I need to speak. So I have a voice, and it's not about grade. It's not about any of those things. It's about adding value to the conversation. So effectively, you know, taking feedback and acting on it is very, very important. And I think as part of that, it's very important because, you know, it helps you with upskilling. You know, I think to a certain point, this also plays to the fact that it's important that you upskill yourself based on some of the feedback, based on the guidance that you get from the stakeholders and the networks that you're building by doing the steps 1 to 4 that I've spoken about. Because you see, in life, you don't really know what you like or you don't like. You like what you're exposed to. And a good example of that is, you know, very often, I mean, for those of us from Nigeria or any other place, you know, we're all very familiar with vanilla ice cream. So very often you'll ask, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? If it's not vanilla, it's strawberry. If it's not strawberry, it's chocolate. But I remember when I came to England and I went to an ice cream shop, this is many moons ago, and I saw almost 20 flavors of ice cream. And I'm stood there thinking, what in the world? You know, I only ever liked 1 or 2 or Neapolitan, which had a mix of the 3, because those were the only 3 that I was exposed to. You know, growing up, I didn't like cheese at all. But now, if you check in my fridge, you probably would find at least 4 or 5 different types of cheeses. Because beyond the fact that you like what you're exposed to, you also evolve. What you did not like 5 years ago, you might like now. What you did not do 5 years ago, you might be able to do now. So you need to be very deliberate about upskilling, and you need to be flexible and open. So when you start to have these conversations and you're building this network, some of those opportunities that will come to you would be things that you're not necessarily comfortable with, or something that you think, you know what, I'm not sure I know that. Most of the people who do it didn't know it. They walked into it, they learned it, and they started doing it. Every CEO became a CEO one day. right? And before that day, they were not CEOs. So how did they know how to be a CEO? They just took the chance. So you need to be flexible and be deliberate. I've moved into different bits of the business where I've not had prior experience. And when some of those opportunities fell on me, I just thought I'll do it. I remember one time when I was going to go for a role, literally, I had just helped somebody, again, something unrelated. The person needed help. He had heard that, oh, Dammy can help with this thing. And he reached out to me and I said, yeah, I can absolutely help. And I did. And after helping, he asked me, oh, I heard you're looking for a new gig. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, oh, I know somebody doing something around process improvement and a bit of compliance. Are you interested? I had zero experience in process improvement or compliance. Yes, I'm interested, right? And I got in there, and I did it for about 18 months to 2 years. I learned it. But the reason I was able to do it was because, one, I was willing to upskill, and I was also flexible. So, that is also something I think is very, very sort of useful and important. And then the final thing I'll touch on, and we'll kind of just open for questions, because I just want to be conscious that I don't just talk and don't give people a chance to kind of ask or anything, is speak up and don't undersell yourself. I think particularly amongst us as Africans, we often will think that promotion will come to us if we do our jobs well. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You often here have to go for the promotion. You have to speak up about the fact that you think you're ready for the next thing. And you cannot afford to undersell yourself in the name of humility, right? I say to people a lot of the time, if the trumpet is yours, nobody can blow it better, right? So blow your own trumpet. But I'm not saying go and, what would you say, exaggerate your ability. If it is your ability and you can deliver on it, absolutely go in there and say it. Don't be shy about it, that you're ambitious, that you're looking for something. But once you've taken time to hone the skills in your current experience, built a stakeholder network, developed a good reputation within that space, and you think you're ready to move, absolutely speak up. And when you're doing that, be very clear about what you're bringing to the table, right? Be clear about what you're bringing to the table. Be clear about where your development points are as well, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of us often go in at, and sometimes might have a negative impact. You come in saying you're the best thing since sliced bread, and they ask you, okay, so what do you think are your development needs? And you've got nothing to say. It just shows that you've not done a proper 360 review of yourself. So when you go in speaking up, saying, I think I'm ready for the next thing, it's being clear that, well, I'm ready for the next thing. I know that I might be, this 1, 2, 3 points might be points of development for me, but absolutely, I'm aware of them. I'm working on them. But it doesn't take away from the fact that I think I'm ready for the next thing. So I think those are sort of just some of the key learns that I think I've had in terms of sort of my career journey and navigating and building sort of relationships and managing relationships that have helped me sort of progress thus far. So I'll pause for a moment and let's see if there are any questions.
Great, amazing. Thank you very much, Dammy. For those who are just joining us on the call, Dammy Lawal is National Director with Barclays Bank in the UK. He's just taking us through his personal learnings on his journey. The topic of this discussion is stakeholder management and visibility in the workplace. The group, presenting this conversation today is the EU Managers Community Group of the Covenant Community Groups, right? We just wanted to take a pause and see if some of us have some questions. So please feel free, if you have questions, to put them in the chat and then start to raise your hands. And I would obviously give you some time to ask the questions. So first of all, I wanted to appreciate you, Dammy, for such a very practical, couple of, tips. We really are grateful for the opportunity. We know how difficult it is to get, space or time on your schedule. Thank you very much for the opportunity as well. We just wanted to appreciate you to start with. So I see a few hands are up. I'll just, allow questions and then we'll just take it from there. Please go
Quick
ahead.
disclaimer. Amen. Amen to the prophecy, by the way. Not a director yet, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's within our sight. So yeah, amen.
Yeah. Anu Sonia, please go ahead.
Hi, Dammy. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Anu.
It was great listening to you. And thank you for sharing those tips. I think my 2 questions. The first is, with us working in the digital space, when I mean digital space, meaning that you're not in the office anymore, right? So just as you mentioned, all of those times where you can quickly dish out your elevator pitch while you're grabbing coffee or you're on the line or whatever, is no longer there. So what are the practical ways you found opportunities to, and real life examples would be great if you don't mind, where you've like had to use those elevator pitches in the digital working space as we know it, right? That's one question. And then the second thing is, as you grow in your career, doing your job well is no longer a big deal. Like you do your job well, yeah, because they know you are brilliant. That's why they hired you, right? And so there's that time where you now have to do things that is beyond. In my industry, they call them the side of desk. So things that make the company look good, aside from the core of your job. And I'm sure you've had to do some of those things. So my question really for that is, how do you choose the ones that are important to you as your person? I say this because I'm very particular, but I didn't just want to do anything because I want to be visible. I want to do it because I have interest in it. But then in the cases where these things are not yet available, what are the things that you did aside from your core job?
Okay. So the first question, and brilliant questions, by the way, Anu. So the first question around using the elevator pitch, and you're spot on with the fact that we're often all working from home now. It's a bit difficult. But what that has meant, 2 things I've done is, before every meeting, I try to prepare. And, before, sometimes you just waltz into the meeting and everyone is there and, okay, just listen and walk out. But apparently, there's a research that shows that for every minute before a meeting that you spend preparing, potentially you could save or cut down the meeting time by 10 minutes. But what that means is you're a lot more articulate in your thoughts, you're a lot clearer, for example, with your questions and stuff like that. So what that really helps do is that in those meetings, when you ask a question or when you make a comment, they're a lot more noticeable by some of the senior leaders or by any of the stakeholders. So I think that's one thing I think is very, very important. And then the second thing that I've done as well is to just, as you've done the other things in terms of knowing your landscape and stuff, reach out to people deliberately. So for example, this week I had 2 conversations with 2 MDs, specifically around career development. Put time in the diary because I've done bits of work that have helped them notice me, right? So whether it's through meetings and stuff like that, and those meetings are a good segue in. Oh, you know what? I'm working on this project as well. I see you're the MD leading it. I just want to get some time in your diary to get, from you what the outcomes you want are. And that puts you on their radar, and then you can start building a relationship with them from there. So I think being deliberate about putting, there's this default thing. I mean, in my sector, every meeting is half an hour, right? Go in and look for 15 minutes, right? It doesn't have to be half an hour. I just want to have a quick catch up to, get the outcomes you're looking for and stuff like that. And that builds it. And then when you know what the kind of things they're looking for are, and you're working towards that, at the end of it, you can always then touch base and ask for feedback. Because I reached out to you to understand what the goals you were setting for this piece of work is, and I've delivered against those. So, I'm just thinking, what would you like to, say or what you think? And then potentially, the office is not a no-go zone, right? So we all still come into the office once, however infrequent it is now. So what you then start to find is some of them will then say, oh yeah, let's catch up for a coffee when next you're in the office. So sometimes also be deliberate about going to the office once in a while, because, I think there's still a role for the office. So, I mean, I've not gone for quite a couple of weeks because I've been quite inundated with other bits of work, but I deliberately try to go into the office once a week just so that I still am able to bump into stakeholders, you know, and sort of almost proverbially do that whole, hello, I'm still here, you know, this is what I'm working on and stuff like that. So hopefully those points cover the first question. And then to your second question, side of desk, a very, very familiar term. So yes, you get your job because you're brilliant at what you do, but ultimately to start with, you know, make sure you're brilliant at what you do, and don't focus on the side of desk stuff. On the side of desk stuff, I think two things are very important. I think one is it must align with what is important to you as a person, right? So if there's nothing that aligns to that, don't necessarily, or if it must align to you as a person is the first thing I'll say. And then the second is it must be really important to the business. Now, provided there is no clash, right? Sometimes you can make sacrifices. So it might not be so important to you, but at this point in time, it's very, very important to the business. And one of the things that gets you noticed is, you know what, this is important to the business, and I have taken an interest in it, and I'm actively supporting it because it's important to the business. Now, I'm very emphatic on the fact that it does not go against any of your own core beliefs, right? So there are certain things that might, and if they don't, then you can just nicely not get involved. But then there are other things that are not. So for example, I remember in the wake of the George Floyd incident a couple of years ago, I wasn't so big on the maybe diversity or reverse mentoring or any of those things and stuff. But when that happened, what happened in my organization was that all the senior MDs were looking for Black reverse mentors. And in the VP space, you know, director space within my organization, they're very, very few and far between. So, you know, there was then a case of, okay, who can we speak to and stuff. And it's something I'd not really been, I mean, I wasn't just involved in it, right? I just came in, did my job really well and did every other thing that I had to do. And if I didn't have to do that, I didn't have to do it. But at that point, it was very important. So I stepped up and decided to be a reverse mentor for a number of senior MDs, you know. But what that then did was it increased my visibility, not just within my business unit, right, but beyond into the wider UK business, because you know, it was a case of this is a pressing need of the business at this point in time. And you know, my MD was more than pleased that, you know, I'm like, okay, you know what, yes, I'll mentor your boss's boss and mentor this. So I had the ears of some of these very senior people as well, you know, because I was willing to do it. So I think that would be what I'd say you should look at, that, you know, where there's a critical need within your business, if it does not go against your own values, absolutely be willing to support, because the business is always looking for people who are willing to support. That's what that says about you, that you're willing to support the vision of the business.
Thank you, Dammy. That was quite useful.
Great. Thank you for the questions. Our guy at the top, and for joining the call. Gordon Henry, your hand was up. Do you have a question before I go on to Busola? Gordon Henry. Okay, probably just move on to Busola. Busola, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dammy. I mean, I picked a lot while she spoke. My question is with regards to the issue of putting yourself forward for promotions when you think you're due for it or when you think you deserve it. I mean, coming from Nigeria, we just have this overly very humble approach. You know, as you spoke about it, one question that came to mind was, how do you draw the line between being too ambitious and having this conversation, because I see like, how do I just go to my stakeholders and begin to, or my manager or my whoever, and begin to say, oh, I think I'm due for a promotion now. In my head, the first thing is, you know what I do, I've delivered on my job. Don't you guys think that I am deserving of this promotion? But now you're saying it won't come to you naturally. You have to, put yourself out there and say, I'm due for it. How do I balance this?
Okay, so the first thing I'd say is what you find is it's very rare that you have what you call in-role promotions, at least in my sector. And when I say in-role promotion is I continue doing exactly what it is I'm doing in my job description, and then I get promoted, right? Sometimes it does happen, that, okay, you carry on that role, but the role gets regraded. So effectively, what you're doing when you're asking for a promotion or you're saying you want to progress your career is, I have done this, I know this, I want to do something else that is more challenging, right? So you're basically saying, potentially, I'm going to leave what it is that I'm doing. Now, for you to say you've mastered what you're currently doing, I think the balance between being overly ambitious and underselling yourself is, what are the defined matrix? So often there's a principle called contracting. So at the start of the year, or at the start of a job, you sit down with your manager and say, okay, what are we setting out as the goals for this year? What do I need to achieve, right? And stuff. So before you go and say, I think I'm good at this, or I think I'm ready for the next thing, it has to be clear that you have consistently ticked, if not 100%, at least 95%, within reason of what it is as stipulated between both of you in your contract to say, well, this is what I'm being targeted to deliver for this year. So for example, in the bank, we've got, different levels of maybe relationship managers, just using them as an example. So if I'm an analyst relationship manager, and I sit down with my regional director and he tells me, okay, these are the matrix under which you're going to be measured on, and this is what I want you to deliver. Now, if I go in and I deliver that, and I've delivered it maybe in 8 months, if I'm in the role maybe for 2 years, and the following year we have that same thing and I deliver, so basically I'm showing consistent delivery, right? Then yes, absolutely, let's have the conversation, because we've had a conversation around what success looks like, and I have delivered against success. So I'm now saying, I want to try something else, right? And I think what also shows that you're ready is you having a bit of an idea of what that something else is. So this is why I said you should be aware of your landscape. So your next step might not even be a step within your business. So for example, when I was in personal banking and I started out as a personal bank in retail, by the time I was having a conversation with my manager to say, I think I'm ready for the next thing, which was barely about a year. So it's not about time. I'd sort of in every month, would have, okay, this is your target for the month. So by the time I'd done it for like maybe 7-8 months and I was hitting my targets and stuff, I knew that, look, I know this, I'm doing this, I'm ready for the next challenge. But that next challenge was not in personal banking. That next challenge was in business banking. And the reason I knew it was in business banking was I had reached out to stakeholders. I knew the topography of the landscape. I knew what the next opportunity looked like in personal banking, and I knew I didn't really want that. So by the time I'm having a conversation saying I'm ready for the next thing, I'm also saying this is what I think that next thing looks like. So it's not necessarily that you as my land manager have to do anything. I'm just making you aware, because maybe I'm going to start engaging with this person, to explore what opportunities are there, or there might be a way by which you can also help. So I think that's the way I'd look at it. It should be a balance between you delivering against your first role and then saying, okay, I'm looking for the next thing, because it's not always the case that the promotion is just, we're promoting you, but you're going to be doing the same thing.
Thank you. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Great. Thank you for that great question, Busola. Just wanted to give some time to Kenny. Please go ahead with your question.
All right, thank you so much. And this has really been a useful discussion. Firstly, I want to first apologize if you may have discussed this earlier. I wouldn't know because I joined a bit late. My question is this, my work actually involves a lot of engagement with stakeholders. But one thing I noticed about the culture here in England is the idea of starting meetings with small talk before diving into the session. It was a major cultural change for me because while in Nigeria, you call a meeting and you dive straight in. But here, if you try to do that, it seems like a strange thing. So my question is, what are your strategies for ice breaking? For like it could be one-to-one meetings and general meetings with people, because I think that's something I still struggle with. But yeah, majorly. That's my question.
So that's an interesting one. And it's a bit of a gamble, but I think yes, it's standard meeting etiquette, right? That you start with a bit of small talk, and the idea, I think what I would suggest and what I do is just be broad in terms of potentially what you do outside work, because the broader you are with what you do outside work, the more the likely chance that you're able to find a sort of connection point with people. You see, one of the reasons why you get paid as much as you get paid is not necessarily because of the value you bring to the organization. It's so that you can do more things outside work, right? So for example, every summer you'd have people talk about the holidays they've gone on or they've been on. It's not about you saying, okay, you've made all that money and then you just sent it, for example, to Nigeria, and then they ask, oh, so what are you doing for the summer? You're like, what am I doing? What am I expected to do? I'm not expected to do anything. I spent the money already. It's to build those experiences, because those experiences are able to change the dynamics of business, right? So I'll give a very interesting example. So in the summer, one of our partners, the CEO came from, he came from Canada, and we basically were having dinner in Mayfair. And effectively, the first half hour was talking about skiing, scuba diving, holidays, fancy restaurants, and stuff like that. Now, if you've not done any of those things, you're going to sit there thinking. But the reality is, for business to be done, people buy into people. You can do the business almost anywhere. So to get that buy-in of people, you kind of need to be able to make a connection. And nothing is off the table. Ask about their family, ask about their holiday, ask about their weekend. It's always a good starting point. And the other tip I'd say is people like to talk about themselves. So you don't necessarily have to say anything yourself. You just need to ask them the question, oh, so how was your weekend? And go around the room that way. And they will talk, and they would completely forget that they probably didn't ask you. So you don't necessarily need to divulge much. You just need to have that etiquette of, asking and being polite. And sometimes it makes all the difference. There was a time I was at not loggerheads, but we needed a business decision from a particular part of the business. They were not willing to budge, absolutely no. And we had drinks after work, and stuff. And out there in the pub, I was stood with the director, talked about his family, told me about his wife, told me about his kids, told him about mine, had a bit of a laugh. And then after 10 minutes, the same thing that we had been a loggerhead for over 3 weeks, I raised it. I explained it to him there and then. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize it was that. But that's fine, we can sort it out. And the following morning, sent an email, done. So you'd be surprised that a lot of these things, a lot of business decisions are actually made outside of work. And I think that it's the psychological part or the psychology of business. But my tip to that will be expose yourself, as much as comfortable with, so whether it's reading books, watching the news, watching sport, talk about the weather. But typically people like to talk about themselves. So ask them what's pertinent, if it's in the summer, oh, have you been on holiday? How was your holiday? Or, when are you going on holiday? Where are you going? If it's post the weekend, if it's Wednesday, happy hump day, how's your week been? What you guys working on? It can literally be anything.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. We are at top of the hour right now. Just one more question. Someone sends to me. I'll just read out that question. Hopefully, we'll wrap up in 10 minutes. Just to ask for your permission, Dammy, and everyone else on the call. We're going slightly above time. The question I have in my chat is, how do you manage a situation where your stakeholders have conflicting views on an issue?
Conflicting view on an issue. So that's always a difficult one, right? And I get, and one of the competencies you often find, when you're looking for, more senior roles is, how have you managed a difficult stakeholder? So that in itself is a skill. And I live by the principle, raise the voice of your argument, or raise your argument, don't raise your voice, right? Because particularly as Africans, we can be very passionate, sometimes, and before you know it, you're expressive, and somebody sees that as being aggressive and sees that as you raising your voice at them. So very often, what I do is I think of it from the other perspective. So because, for example, in my role now, we manage partnerships. And many of the partnerships, in banking, partnerships is a new thing, right? Across the board, typically banks have suppliers, everybody works for them. Now, the concept of partnership, whilst is similar to suppliers, it's completely different because now you're partners. You don't necessarily control what they do. And the bank as a whole is not necessarily familiar with that sort of, kind of landscape. So very often I find myself needing to influence stakeholders and bring them on my side. But the key to that is understand what the core problem is, understand what it is that they're trying to get or what they're finding difficult and solve for that. So it's not just about winning the argument, it's about solving what they're solving for. And once you do that, they will come on your side.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I hope it answered the question for whoever asked it. Kingston.
The only thing I'll add to that is
okay.
Sometimes, the risk is still always going to be there and you might need to escalate. So it's not saying that you must always solve the problem. So sometimes it might just be that you have to escalate it because somebody else has to make that decision.
Great. Thank you. Kingston, you want to go ahead with the question, please?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Dammy. Good to meet you. We've met before at Barclays in 2019 before the pandemic. I wanted to ask you a question about.
Hope I left a good impression.
Well, you did. I know you can't see my face now, but I'll chat to you later.
Kingston, I think I remember you.
Yeah. Let's save time. The question I want to ask, in your promotions, right, that you've got so far, was there a time where you felt like you had you got the next role, but you felt like maybe the increase is not what you were expecting? Maybe you demand the team were managing your expectation, or I don't know how to say it. So you got the promotion, but the pay rise also is lower than maybe market average or so.
Yes.
So how did you handle situations like that?
So yes, so that's a very, very interesting question. And that's a question that is very commonplace these days, because a lot of our peers, and when I say peers, Black people haven't risen to senior ranks. So we don't have role models or mentors that will kind of help us in navigating that space. And the key to that is negotiation. I've literally been stung by that problem myself, where I had said yes to the offer without even hearing what the pay rise was. And then by the time I heard the pay rise, I was like, But, when you're thinking strategically, and this goes back to my first point, the best thing any job can give you is the experience. It's not always the pay. However, what you should know is, when you're being offered a job, you have the right to negotiate. When you're going for a job, the interview is two-way. You're being interviewed for your skills and stuff, but you're also interviewing the company, you're interviewing the team, you're interviewing the individuals. So when they choose to accept you, you're also needed to choose to accept them. When they give you the terms under which you get employed, you give them the terms under which you want to be employed. So when they tell you, okay, we're going to offer you the job, fantastic, thank you. What are the terms? And then they tell you the numbers. If you're not in agreement with the numbers, then tell them, well, fantastic, thank you. I've done my market research and this is what it's going for. And then if you've got any personal reasons, for example, maybe travel and stuff, you can put those also on there and then basically say, this is what I'm expecting. Usually that's the best way to go, because once you sign the dotted line, your chances of negotiation have literally dropped probably 80%. So you would be lucky to be able to negotiate when you're in, but when you're coming in, absolutely do that. So before you sign dotted line, understand that, look, the whole process is two-way, and you know, no one's putting a gun to your head to say yes to a job, so you can say no if it does not meet your terms. Referring to internal promotions, you can negotiate as well. So because you're going for the job, and it's if you're in a role and literally you just get an in-role promotion, you know, so you're still doing the same thing and they're promoting you, yes, you may not have the power to negotiate at that point. But if you've gone for another role within the business, because you think I've mastered this role, I've done a good job, I'm going for the next thing, and I've actually gone through the internal process and I have basically been accepted for that, you absolutely can negotiate.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that question. If there are no more questions, I just wanted to hand over to one of our group members to sort of, you know, appreciate you and end the session. Lawal, Dammy, can you hear me? Please go ahead if you can hear me.
Okay, yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you so much, Dammy, Lawal, for the insights shared. Really, really enlightening for me. Like my notes, right? My notes are full, and I'm sure that every one of us learned one thing or the other that we can use as we go on to continue with stakeholder management and visibility. Thank you, and on behalf of the Covenant Community Group, EU managers and managers to be, I would like to say thank you, and say to everyone to have a good evening, enjoy the rest of the weekend, and yes, I think that's about it.
Please feel free to appreciate Dammy in the chat. Thank you very much, Dammy, for such an amazing session. We learned a lot of things. You know, feel free to appreciate Dammy in the chat, send a message in the chat, and let him know exactly how much I appreciate the session.
No more, neither shall they.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Dammy.
Alrighty.